Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. We will be discussing the 5 IT habits that it's time to drop, and it's brought to you by our friends at Scale Computing. Before we get started, I will touch on some features in the webinar console. First of all, this webinar is being recorded. You will receive a link to view the webinar on demand in about a day, so look for that. Also, this webinar is interactive, so at any time you can drop your questions into the Q&A widget on your screen, and we will get them on our side. Remember, if we don't get to your question today, we will have a chance to follow up with you after we're done. Also, we have handouts, and before you finish up today, take the time to download the infographic there. We also invite you to join our attendee chat. That is a good chance for you to say hello to your fellow IT pros and have a conversation there. Remember, with any of these features on your console, you can use the orange buttons at the bottom of your screen to turn those off as you need to. So let's get started. Our speaker today is Michael Lyon, Product Manager at Scale Computing. And with that, Mike, I'll hand it to you to get started.
Thanks a lot, David. Well, thanks for joining us on this afternoon. Wanted to talk about habits, and especially habits that we tend to create for ourselves in IT. And a habit is something that I would say it's easy to form, but it's hard to lose. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. And we find ourselves creating habits by our daily routines, by the things we touch, by the way we buy equipment. They all kind of help to form our behaviors and the way we handle technology. And they're not always good. But just a quick background about me. My name is Mike Lyon. I am practically professionally known as Mikey. I really don't know how it happened. I've been at Scale almost 8 years, but that's kind of been my moniker here. I love finding ways to simplify my life, whether it's cord cutting or it's technology. I like to try and make my life as easy as possible. One of the 12 networking truths always says, a protocol design has not reached perfection until there's nothing left to add, or rather there's nothing left to remove. So I like to make life simple. I work in product management, so I kind of have the best of both worlds in working with customers, working with sales, and working with the product. As David talked about earlier, feel free to drop the questions in the Q&A. If this were in person, I would encourage you to jump up and shout them out because I think they're easier to answer in context. But anything that comes up, please feel free to drop that in the Q&A and we can get to it as soon as the presentation's over. And a quick background about Scale. We were founded in 2008, so we're over 10 years old. And we were really the first to market with the concept of hyperconverged infrastructure. And that's even a term that we coined. And really, it's about simplifying IT infrastructure. Headquarters is Indianapolis, our development office in San Francisco. We have a global presence and over 2,000 customers. But probably one of the most important things that I'm proud of, because I started on the support team here, is our Net Promoter Score. And that's a result of feedback from folks who have engaged with our support team. So it's really a good metric to tell you how good is a support organization based on the feedback from people who've actually used it. Because there's nothing worse than a product than when you try to call and get support and you wind up getting sent in 30 different directions. When we talk about hyperconvergence, I think I've said it probably 10 times already, and it's a buzzword that's probably been floating around, but really the concept of hyperconvergence or hyperconverged infrastructure is really simplifying your stack today out of the physical servers and SANs and storage and putting them all into one stack. So the integration of compute, storage, and virtualization layers of infrastructure into a single solution architecture. Or in other words, let's take that entire stack of discrete components we've been working with for years, put them all together under one management layer and under one orchestration layer. And that's what HCI is really all about. At a high level, there's obviously many more benefits, and we'll talk about those later. But let's talk about a habit. And I think about, I was told this in high school by my track coach, that you create a habit by doing one thing 3 times, and you have to undo it 7 times before you forget that habit. I don't know how much truth there is to that. But in a way, you start thinking about how a habit's formed, and it's just about a routine that you repeat. A settled or regular tendency or practice, one that's hard to give up. That's the other attribute of a habit, right? It's something that, because we've been doing it one way for so long, we're, as technologists, naturally resistant to change. For example, we never test our backups out of habit. Now, well, no one would ever really say that, but if it becomes a habit of just setting it, forgetting it, yeah, it's not going to be tested. And if you think about what else we use for substituting habit as a word, practice, custom, pattern, routine, and those last two really highlight it's a pattern and it's a routine, and it's something that we create or we inherit. And it's something that affects our lives because it's a way we behave. I like to define a habit as something we adopt out of convenience or complacency. And maybe that's a little bit too personal of a definition, but the habits that I find myself looking back and over the years in different technology situations, it's really come out of probably complacency or laziness. We'll say that. I don't want to say laziness, but it was really, how do I make my life easier? How can I script this? How can I automate this? And those are just habits we form. We bring them from the different roles and the different jobs and different employers that we've been at throughout your timeline. Customs that you learn, especially early on, tend to stick with us. And we adopt habits and we change the ones we have to accommodate incumbent technology. If you walk into a new role, maybe you have changed a certain way of scripting and automating backups or doing a AD cleanup. Those are things that you could change and adapt your habit to the existing technology. But it's still a habit, right? And we can also form behaviors from existing habits. And maybe those are good and maybe those are bad. But at the end of the day, we're not born with habits. We're not born with this list of things we're going to always have a predilection to do and behave a certain way. We develop these and we form. And bad habits, they're also kind of formed, but again, I think we fall into it. Why? Because it's convenient and because we're lazy. Now, some specific habits. And the first and foremost one that comes to mind is talking about, hardware holdouts. This is a routine that we get into when we're approaching the end of a life cycle for hardware. There's a lot of things that we're faced with. Can I renew it? Do I need to upgrade the application that's running on it if I upgrade the underlying hardware? What's going to be what am I going to be responsible and accountable for if I have to replace the hardware that's here? When I can maybe extend the support contract or upgrade individual components. We become very invested in our routines, and outside of just our IT focus, institutionally, they may not have either budgeted for that change or planned on the fact that this hardware will eventually die. I think that's an unfortunate fact of smaller budgets is that, forecasting for replacements and the life cycle of hardware is not always easy to do. But they sit there and they hold us back. They prevent us from adopting new technologies. They prevent us from making our lives easier. There could be a variety of reasons behind that, but really it's a matter of becoming invested in the existing platform and be invested in their existing routines. Because we know how to maintain this. We know how to make this work. But maybe we need to find a better way to do it. Brand buying. Now, hopefully on Spiceworks, this isn't something that is terribly conducive to habits, but if you become very fixated on a brand or a name or even a platform, and again, this could be a habit because it's a brand or vendor you've used or a vendor you trust. And that's not always a bad thing, but there's more to a brand than just a name. It's the product that's behind it. And, I'm not picking on Cisco, but I'll use the word Cisco as a brand. I mean, think about the breadth of the products that they have now, because when you innovate by acquisition, you wind up with this huge portfolio of products. But what does that brand really mean? What does that brand represent? Does Cisco represent to me like the ATM and frame relay networking? No, they're the communications company, right? But it's a brand, it's not a product. And is the product that you're buying going to be the right fit for you? Is it really what you need? And to figure some of those things out, it's first we have to sit down and extract out what is the value of this product or this widget that I'm buying, as opposed to the cost. What value does it bring to me? How is this going to save me time? And if it's going to be something I'd have to get approval for, how can I validate that this is an investment worth making? What is my TCO? What is my ownership cost? Both personally, as an individual engineer in the organization, and then also as a company. And sometimes I think when you especially can help management or anyone who's responsible for approving the purchases to see the differences between value and what it brings to you and the cost, and seeing if there may sometimes be even a return, it's sometimes eye-opening for management to see that. And also, when you're brand focused, we tend to very quickly eliminate innovators or startup competitors who have a valuable, viable product, but you just haven't heard them because you haven't stumbled into them yet. And name recognition is a huge hurdle for any startup or emerging technology, but it's not a reason to run away and dismiss it, especially on Spiceworks, because here's where we have a chance to reach out to our peers and even in many cases reach out to the vendors directly. But there's nothing more credible than being able to talk to them in Spicehead about their experiences with a specific product. And again, whether it's just one or two vendors, don't limit your list to people who you've known or you bought from before. That's somewhat inheriting the previous bad habit of holding on to legacy infrastructure too long. Don't look at vendor feature matrices or grids. I'm pretty proud to say we really don't do those at scale, because it's very easy to just look at, all right, here's vendor A, vendor B, and vendor C, and their different matrices. And at the end of the day, they're all going to be pointing out the gaps as they have assessed them in each other's product, but there's really no value in that literature at all. The best value is getting your hands on it. We're tactile learners. We want to touch it. And also, don't judge a brand or a company based on its size. Judge it based on the credibility of their reviews. Judge it based on what your peers say. And as we start to replace our old hardware and look at the different brands and expand our menu and our portfolio, maybe it's time to also look at, as we're going through this refresh cycle, to stop fragmenting our infrastructure into different components and silos. And again, whether it's at the hardware level and you've got separate servers from one vendor A, a SAN and NAS from vendor B, you've got your hypervisor software, maybe you're licensing ESX or Hyper-V. At the end of the day, those are different silos that have to be managed. They have to be supported. They each have their own support contracts and different support engagement processes. And when you have to call and pick up the phone if there's a problem, when everything has been so siloed, it's very rare that a vendor will be willing to step out of their own silo in the domain of, okay, this is hardware. No, this is not a hardware problem. This is a network problem. You need to go call vendor B or C. And you get stuck in this, vendor finger pointing routine. And beyond the supportability is the manageability getting more complicated. And you've got different consoles for managing your server health, for managing your hypervisor, for managing your backup, for managing your antivirus. Do we need to have another set of credentials, another password, another portal, UI, whatever you want to call it? Do we really need to have another set of optics to manage our infrastructure? I mean, wouldn't it be nice if they could all just fall under one single pane of glass? Or at least try to minimize the number of glasses you have to pick up and put on a given day. Yeah, and specific to those hardware silos, you need support contracts. They're going to have their own local storage that's managed separately. your managed separate from your SAN. And if you want to provide redundancy at the SAN level, you've really got to double down and duplicate your purchase and investment on what's probably the most expensive component that's on the screen right now. And then the same thing with the hypervisor. It's another management layer, adding additional cost for redundancy to provide replication, or if you want advanced features like that. So now that we've siloed everything, or we're trying to unsilo it, we look back at the pieces and the mess behind us that we've left behind, and we see I've siloed my infrastructure and I've caused more problems and farther deviated away from my goal of simplifying my life by having had a dozen different vendors providing technology. And it's not to say that you have to put all your eggs in one basket or diversification is bad, but diversity does not always guarantee simplicity or even safety. And if we look beyond, looking beyond the infrastructure components that you're buying, we already have to have possibly, an antivirus or some sort of endpoint security. You've got to have maybe a backup console for data or storage path. Before we've even turned on our infrastructure, we're going to have additional vendors. So think about that when you're, building a platform in a new infrastructure that's going to require multiple vendor support. That's obviously not going to make your life any easier, whether it comes to the implementation, the integration with the existing components or the existing hardware, or even the deployment. Also, simplifying and co-terminating support agreements so that you've got an annual point in time where okay, my hardware renewal is due, my endpoint security renewal is due, all at the same time. When you've got vendor explosion, it's kind of difficult to do that. You may be paying a renewal support bill once a month. As far as, we don't want to add additional vendors. How do we actually avoid this and break this habit? Well, again, we can look at sourcing from different vendors, but go back to Spiceworks and start looking around there. Talk to your peers, talk to your colleagues, and see what they've done. And don't ignore the challenges that come from having diversity in vendors, because they're not insignificant. And they're challenges that can add up and really start to cause a little pain when it's, one little paper cut of time can quickly turn into, death by 1,000 cuts. Over-provisioning. This is the last habit that I think we are all probably most guilty of. And at this point, we probably all are running in a virtual environment of some sort. And if you think about the first time when it was virtualized, you felt like you had fairly limitless resources. And it was easy to set up, okay, I'm going to set up a test server, or I'm going to give this server, 3 or 4 times the amount of RAM or CPU it's even needed for. In some cases, it's even licensed for from Windows. And same thing on the storage side of it. We're easily swooned by having huge pools of resources that now we can start, okay, I've got an endless pool of CPU and memory in this now. Well, that endlessness ends really quickly. And, solutions, when you're deploying them, need to be scalable to account for that. Because if you want to over-provision, and you're over-provisioning in the purchasing standpoint, you're going to be, doubling or maybe tripling the amount of investment you need. Because if you can buy for today and buy on what I know can work today or maybe within the next 12 months, I want to have a scalable solution that at that 1 year or 2 year mark, when it's time to add additional resources, I'm not forced to rip and replace or grow into some unreasonable amount or increment that doesn't match what I need. It doesn't match what my business needs or what I'm trying to accomplish with this new initiative. Over-provisioning is, oftentimes a result of vendor FUD, and, it seems to make the most sense to buy 2, 3, 4 times what you need. But a lot of times you get to the end of that 5-year cycle and you've used half the storage you've used, or physical host, you really didn't need that many cores. With hyperconverged infrastructure, it's really easy to add on in a very modular fashion in a reasonable size increment of the amount of storage and resources you need. Because it's simple to just add a small compute node into a cluster and scale it out. And that's the other, one of the many benefits of hyperconverged infrastructure is it allows you some latitude to plan for the future, to plan for future growth, without forcing you to make this huge investment up front, of 2 to 3x of what you probably are really going to need. And then in the cases where you need to provide redundancy for that, you're doubling down on that already overinflated and loaded investment. It's okay to over-provision your VM disk, but it's not okay to over-provision your infrastructure when you're sizing it. Just like you wouldn't want to under-provision it and find yourself in the same situation. But have you had unexpected growth and you inadvertently under-provision, you're at the 6-month mark now instead of the 12-month mark, and you need additional resources again. I don't want to have to go back and rip and replace everything I purchased, or to have to buy, I need to add additional resources, so I have to buy, these absurdly large quantities of disk or CPU and memory when I really only need enough for, 2 or 3 more workloads. And the resources that, you pay for, especially if you think of a hyperconverged infrastructure stack, it's like your own private cloud on premises. So, you're paying for those resources whether or not you've got a customer internally, using a VM, let's say. So those unused resources, they all still have a cost. And if you're overbuying, some of the efficiency gains and the cost savings you can get from HCI really can be diluted and wiped out if you're buying more than you need. And not to mention, it would be nice to take to management of, hey, here's a smaller, leaner proposal that we can digest this and grow as we need, rather than every 5 or 7 years, dropping out this outlay of cash that may or may not have been properly budgeted for. And not to mention those huge investments just have equally large support renewal costs to them. And don't let vendors change your approach. Don't let them send you collateral or misleading information if that clashes or contrasts with what you've planned out and mapped out. You know what your resources needs are going to be better than anyone else in your company. And outside of the fact that management loves to throw all surprises on us, no one's going to know better what your company is going to need now and for the future than you. So if we look at the traditional, we call it the inverted pyramid of doom or 3-2-1 architecture, this is what most of the virtualization deployments prior to hyperconverged infrastructure look like. Where you basically have, I've got 3 physical hosts, I've got a pair of redundant SANs connected on a fabric, or a pair of switches connected redundantly to my SAN fabric. And the SAN at this point is now my single point of failure. But maybe I'm running Hyper-V or ESX on those hosts. And then externally of that, I've got a mother-in-law management server. So a CVMM or vSphere that's running separately outside of my console, right? But again, does this seem like it's a little bit more complicated than it needs to be? Yes. And that's what hyperconverged infrastructure really is all about. I talked about simplifying, and that's what it is providing and giving you the cloud-like experience within your own infrastructure, but it's on your premises, and it's in your control. I can demo this in just a minute, but it's really that experience of, I've logged into a web console and I can create a VM. I don't care where those blocks are coming from. I just want it to be highly available and it to have XYZ x86 resources. And that's what hyperconverged infrastructure is delivering. Because on the back end, all the way the storage is provisioned and the resources are handled and allocated, you don't really care. You don't have to care, and you don't want to care because you have better things to do. Let the intelligent computer on the back end make the decisions for you. You can manage the atomic unit of the data center, which today is your VM, or container. So hyperconverged infrastructure is about simplicity, bringing together all those discrete consoles. So you've got one single pane of glass to view your entire infrastructure, and also getting it deployed in a reasonable amount of time. I did a Spiceworks on the air, I think 3 years ago, and you can still Google it, where I got a cluster up and running in less than 30 minutes, to the point where people who were watching the broadcast could actually log into the user interface. It's not a week-long engagement with professional services. It's something that you can do yourself remotely without any expertise. Having built-in availability in HA, again, making sure that I've got redundancy if there's a disk failure or a node failure, that I'm protected against that. And then it's built in and it's by default. Just like GDPR is secure by default, we are highly available by default. We talked about this with our over-provisioning, being scalable and having scalability outside of being our namesake for us it's paramount when you think about how difficult it is to really forecast. Forget about 12 months, but 18 to 24 months. How many of us actually have a magic 8-ball that we can shake and get an answer that's going to be reasonable with what our management or business is going to expect from us? And do they have unreasonable expectations about what we can provide? And when they say, okay, we need to add a new application or expand this, and you give them a quote for a whole new infrastructure as opposed to, okay, I just need to add a single node's worth of resources, that's really where the scalability can come into play. And not requiring that you keep parity with having the same node type and infrastructure type, but being allowed to mix and match node types and family types to give you ultimate flexibility without locking you into a specific platform or series and then sending you down one path. And then obviously something you can afford. As a unified stack, there's a lot of efficiency gains that allowed us to eliminate costs along the way, most notably pricing for hypervisor licensing, since it's built in, and no other separate software licensing, no SAN, it's just all one stack. And there's different approaches and different, I guess, definitions of HCI. So I kind of wanted to talk to this just to revisit our definition from earlier, where it's hypervisor converged storage, if you think about it. It's not teleconverged, it's not mega converged, it's not hyperbole of converged infrastructure. It was really hypervisor and storage converged into one stack. I'm really putting the storage and the hypervisor as absolutely close together as possible. Now, the other approaches that are in the market for HCI use what are called VSAs, or storage appliances. So they basically virtualize the SAN and turned it into a giant VM that runs on your nodes. That does take away the complexity and the cost in some ways of managing your SAN, but the cost of virtualizing the SAN means you're just now shoving the resource constraints of having to run a virtual SAN into your infrastructure. So between a third to a half of your available resources is actually devoted then to running your virtual SAN, your VSA. What we've done is just, again, the hypervisor and storage are embedded together, so there's no SAN, there's no file system, there's no VMDKs. When you create a VM, it's running directly on the cluster and writing actually to the disks that are in the cluster. Complexity doesn't do us any good. Again, whether it's adding vendors or whether you silo your infrastructure, they require additional expertise, additional training costs, additional training classes. Oftentimes they're not scalable. If for no other reason than by the time you've decided maybe it's time to make an upgrade, this upgrade for vendor A is incompatible with component B. So you have to figure out how to work around that. And then how do I protect and provide a DR plan, whether it's disaster recovery or just backup? How do I protect my assets and my resources? And again, then if I'm not buying in a unified stack, how do I know that I've got software licensing that's valid? Do I have enough cores? Do I have enough sockets? So that am I meeting my vendor requirements if I get audited? Those are all things that it's another spinning item in the back of your mind that we have to keep track of, and just the complexity, it makes everything more expensive. Not just driving up the actual cost, but just the cost of doing business in your day and your day-to-day routine. How can we get better habits? Simplify it. A unified stack and a single vendor support gives you one back to pat, but also one throat to choke. So when you call a hyperconverged vendor and we call scale, we don't have the ability to deflect and say this is a hypervisor problem, or it's a storage problem, or it's a networking problem, because it's all in our stack. So we have to provide this support for that entire stack. But with one vendor and one support, you get a fantastic support experience. And also eliminates the complexities of integration implementation. When you go the 3 I's, once you go past installation, is the implementation and integration going to work? Am I going to be able to shove this into my existing ESX environment? No, it's no expertise or specific skill sets are required, other than being able to probably lift 40 pounds and use a keyboard like JavaScript says. There's no software licensing because we aren't using VMware, and then having backup and DR built in. So whether you want to just provide file level protection all the way up to replicating to another remote cluster, another remote node, or a node in the cloud, that's all built in. There's no other licenses or tiers of software that you'd have to buy up to provide access to those features. So it's simple because you buy one product and it's one part number and everything is built in there. And that would be a big first step towards getting rid of some of those bad habits of complicating our lives and having different vendor silos with all the different applications and support components and all the ancillary things we have to buy to make our magic infrastructure stack stand up and work. Again, so this is a quote that I like, is that the HCI paradigm is designed to simplify infrastructure in a number of ways, including reducing the number of vendors, each with a new threat vector, support costs, and ongoing maintenance overhead that may be unpredictable. This is a quote that I gave because it was initially in the context of, if we've got, for every vendor that I have running an application on my infrastructure, it's another threat vector, and that was initially what it came from. Is what way can they expose my data? What way can they bring in viruses? How can I avoid having another conduit to the outside world? And inevitably, a vendor is going to be that conduit. So, it's really about reducing the number of vendors, reducing the number of components, because each one of those vendors and pieces and parts you have to buy, they've got a support cost, they've got a maintenance schedule, they have the care and feeding. But just again, the add up of that, and the sum of it can be significant, and it's not an insignificant amount of overhead. Not to mention, it's hard to quantify that, and that can be pretty unpredictable as well. And as we expect, the hyperconverged infrastructure market is growing, and it's replacing not just converged infrastructure, or not just this traditional network storage like we expected it to, your SANs and NASs, but even the converged infrastructure market, pre-hyperconverged, is going to be diminishing. So, really, the focus is, HCI as, again, as I like to call it, it's a private cloud that you own. It's on-premises cloud. And if you think about all the reasons we wanted to move everything to cloud 10 years ago, the same reasons hold true for wanting to move it to your own private cloud. Only you don't have to worry about egress fees, bandwidth limitations, having redundant interconnections, things like that. I want to show you a demo because that's the most important thing to me. Because I don't want to PowerPoint you to death. Get my screen share going here. So what we're looking at is a browser, and I'm logged into a basic 3-node cluster. And this is the web interface. Again, it's a browser the least common denominator, everyone has a browser. That's how it's managed and accessed. So everything from my VM consoles is all driven through a browser. I only have one pane of glass, and I don't have to pick a specific node, or I can pick any one node in a cluster, and I'm going to get the same view. And backing up, just to get to this point, let's look at the basic settings. Again, like I said, I did an on-the-air in a half hour, but that's not an exaggeration, because really, you're going to spend more time taking the boxes out and breaking them down and getting them racked than you will configuring it, initializing the cluster. So after that 30-ish minutes of initialization and then some basic housekeeping, we're at a point where we can now log in, drag and drop or upload ISOs and start creating VMs. And creating a VM, I'm not going to go through the process of creating a VM, but this is pretty much basic x86 virtualization here. But I'm not specifying hosts or host affinity. I'm not specifying a data store. I'm not creating any storage pools. I'm not specifying any HA attributes. I'm just creating a VM. And I gave it some information, and now I can go and start that VM. And that's the process of setting up a cluster and creating a VM. Again, it's that magic we all felt when we ever saw that first AWS demo of creating this computer somewhere else on somewhere else's cloud. That's what you have today. It's a good habit, because it's simplifying your life. It's getting rid of the vendor explosion. And it's going to change the way you consume and use IT, right? Because rather than having to deal with, again, even just different management consoles for your storage or your virtual infrastructure, it's all going to be in one pane of glass. Like we talked about having DR and backup built in, at the file level, we can go back to individual days, individual points in time, and even restore. I want to restore an individual disk from a VM, and I want to restore it to a different VM, even for testing. So, I can do that, similar to what Veeam will allow you to do. And then also built in is replication. So if you have a remote single node, so it can either be a remote cluster, a remote single node, or also we do offer a cloud Unity backup service with Google. So it is a virtual single node that runs in the cloud, but I can back up and send my snapshots from my ground. They'll be up there mirrored. Again, I can do file restores, or I can just say, all right, give me a point-in-time snapshot from this VM from a few minutes ago. I can power this VM on. Maybe I want to sandbox and patch a test. Maybe I want to do a database update. You can do it safely. And again, just like you could locally, but this is remote. This is a virtual single node running on Google's cloud, but you could also buy and deploy a physical single node, and that would be your remote recovery point. And then the process of, I've hit that red button, what do I need to do? Well, the beauty of that is it's easy enough to allow you to replicate back. So I can replicate this VM, even though it's a clone, it's not the original one, I can replicate this back to my source cluster. And if I was doing a 4-hour DR test, the only data I'm going to have to send back across the wire is that data that changed in that 4 hours. Or if I had an actual DR declaration, and maybe it was a day, provided that the original ground cluster wasn't destroyed or the source cluster wasn't physically damaged, again, your replication data set is just going to be the differential of what you had initially created. So it's hard to spend a lot of time talking about the UI and digging into it because it's extremely simple. But we talked a little bit ago about brands and, buying products versus brands and having allegiance towards brands. we'd like to talk about, our reputation and the people who would recommend us. And for us, these are our brands and products. These are people who we feel would be representative of someone you could talk to and say, all right, I need to talk to someone. I need to get information about a product. I need to get information about scale. Trusting names and trusting vendors and trusting colleagues on Spiceworks is really going to be the best way to get that information. Because I can't say it enough. The community of individuals and users on Spiceworks, that's your most credible source of information, because we're all here for one another and to help each other out. What do bad habits leave us with? Well, I think good lessons. Right? Get rid of the old stuff. It's time to take out the spreadsheet and figure out, okay, here's my 5-year, 1-year, 3-year plan. I need to start replacing this hardware, because getting rid of that is going to make your life immensely easier. And legacy equipment's really it's not doing anyone any favors. And I know sometimes you can walk into a shop and there's a server that's been sitting in the corner for 5 years and no one knows what it does. But if you turn it off, things stop working. It's time to let go of those things. Brand awareness. Don't let marketing collateral and some fancy swag deter you from really what the product's capabilities are going to be and whether or not they're going to be a match for what your business needs are. And when you're reviewing and revisiting your infrastructure, let's not try and throw everything into silos and, fragment even farther the way we have to support and care and feed for our equipment and the applications. And don't let your discrete components take up indiscrete amounts of time. Because we're IT people. We need vacations. We need to be able to turn our phones off once in a while. Again, vendor explosion. Just at the outset, limit your search. And while you're doing that, connect with your peers and colleagues and source a good vendor or a good VAR even to work with. Look for a good partner who's got, a good reputation and is going to be there working out for your best interests. And then lastly, this is about buying and forecasting, but the overprovisioning trap. Strategize, plan, and be fiscally prepared for the far future, but buy and deploy your infrastructure for the near future. Again, we don't have a crystal ball or magic 8 ball that we've ever had a whole lot of luck with being able to predict our future needs. But we need to be able to be adaptable and agile to respond to those needs. And that's really what breaking these habits and adopting hyperconverged infrastructure is going to allow you to do. It's going to give you that agility to answer with confidence. Yes, we can do that. No, we can't. Yes, we're going to need more resources, and here it's going to cost us. And just being able to, on your feet answer those questions really is going to make your day-to-day life easier. But at the end of the day, the simplicity and having a single pane of glass, a single vendor, and a single stack is really what's going to make those vacations feel better to you, because you can truly turn your phone off and disconnect for a little bit and being able to relax, know that at the very least, your inbox might be full, but the building won't be burned down when you come back. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions. Let's see here.
Yeah, remember to use that Q&A widget and get those questions in, and we'll get to as many as we can. And right now we do have a few. So, Mike, I see a question from Tim. Is Scale a good platform for VDI?
Yeah, there's a couple questions in there from Tim on VDI. Yes, we do. It's a good platform for VDI, and we do support VDI deployments. VDI itself is a fairly broad subject, but whether you want a connection broker type deployment, we have that, or if you just are using RDP and terminal services, we can put you in touch with customers who run the entire spectrum of VDI, from their version of VDI is I've just got 300 VMs that are running, or they have an actual broker, something like LeoStream, or they're using terminal services. So yes, it would work for VDI.
Okay, Robin, I see you're a current scale customer and use third-party backup for VMs. We have file level restore.
I didn't drill into it too much on the demo, but we can follow up after this. But the version I was demoing was version 8.1. So within there, we do have file level restore capabilities in that you can take a snapshot of a VM, and if your VM, it's got 2 disks, let's say, I can go back to a specific snapshot point in time and actually get an individual VM disk. I don't have to restore the whole VM. I can just attach that disk from a snapshot to a running VM, extract my files, recover my database, do what I need to do, and then I can get rid of that disk. So, in addition to that, that did give us, some hot add and remove capability. But yeah, that does give you the ability to do file level restore without having to either clone a whole VM to pull the file out or deploy an agent-based solution. All right, Steve 9603. Given how terrible a lot of vendors are bad at quoting and changing sales reps, how do you walk the line between picking some vendors over others? That's a great question, Steve. And to be honest, we've been doing a lot of win-loss analysis. Yeah, I'm on the product side, so very data-driven lately. But a lot of the feedback we get from customers, both in wins and losses, is that they had a great experience with scale during the sales process. And that comes down to they heard everything mentioned, from responsiveness to quoting to how quickly they are to turn around, and even just being available. And if you're working directly with vendors, I would say make sure that you've got a good rapport. But I would also look at the fact that, are they responsive to quotes? Do they turn those things around to me in a reasonable amount of time? And do you get questions answered straightforwardly? And do you have the accessibility and reach to that vendor like you feel you would need to be in order to be successful if there were problems long term? Now, the other way to work around that is, if you work with a VAR partner, they can do a lot of data interference for you and probably, be a better solution long term. So a VAR can be a good choice to help you, navigate the vendor tightrope. But in general, yeah, it's, early on and how things are going to be behaving during the quoting process is probably a good harbinger of sorrow if there's problems there.
Okay, so what happens when, not if, the hardware does fault recovery?
Steve, and you're right. This is commodity off-the-shelf hardware, so it does fail. The most common failure you're going to run into is a disk failure. And what you would see would you'd get a notification from the user interface. You'd get an email sent to you saying a disk has failed and is being removed. There's not a data integrity risk, because what we'll do is, okay, we knew everything that was on that disk. We're going to evacuate it and copy its contents out to the remaining disks in the cluster. So as long as you have enough space to empty out that disk, at that point, that disk has been emptied out. We now have, again, we have redundant copies of the data because everything's written twice. So I can remove that disk and replace it. Now, I don't have to shut down the node. I don't have to shut down the cluster or take anything offline, because we aren't dealing with the file system or anything. We aren't having to reconstruct a RAID set. We're literally just putting, essentially just, you pop the disk out of a JBOD array and shove it right back in. When there's node failures, or if someone trips on a power cord, we know what was running on a given node. So the workloads that were on that node that was restarted or lost would just be started elsewhere on the remaining 2 or 3 nodes. And that process of, if a node goes offline, we move the VMs to the other nodes. That's how we do rolling updates. So whenever there's firmware updates, again, as Stack owners, we're touching all the components in there so you don't have to. We do those in a rolling fashion, so you don't have to take a maintenance window. We'll just reboot a node if we need to. And again, it's very easy to pull nodes out of a cluster and put them back in because of the way we're handling storage underneath. All right, those are the ones that we got coming through here.
Okay,
there's some more coming in, David.
If there's any more, you can still try to get one more in. In the meantime, let me just remind everyone that if you stepped away or missed any part of the session today, you will get a link to review this on demand, so look for that. And also, you can still check out that handout section for the infographic. Let's check one more time, Mike, on questions. Did you see one, last one?
How do you access the interface if you cannot access the web interface?
If you could never get to the web interface, I would call support. There would be a problem there. Because that should always be accessible. Good question, though.
All right. Well, I think that's about it on questions. And
I'm a green guy for scale in the community. So if anything didn't get an answer here, you want to drop me an email, feel free. Again, it's not on the screen, but I am just Mike at scalecomputing.com. So I'm also open to direct emails if you have any questions.
All right. Well, thanks, Mike, for the presentation today, and special thanks to Scale for sponsoring this webinar today. And thanks, everyone, for attending. We want to let everyone know that we've announced our winner for the contest. It's in the attendee chat right now. And we'll also put that information in the community in our contest page. So take a look there. So with that, I look forward to seeing everyone again for another partner webinar soon. Until then, stay safe and keep it spicy. Take care, all.